Okay. Everybody hear me? We all good? Okay, so two things. The first, apologies. My computer exploded almost. Kaput? You want it? Yeah. Yay! And second, I'm going to try and speak a little bit slowly. I want everybody to get my jokes. If I'm going too fast, can you guys tell me to slow down? Yeah? Okay. Cool. Hello, my name is Dan Hett. Little help? Kaput. Yeah. Aha, okay. Unkaput. Yay, hello. My name is Dan Hett. I'm a technologist and artist, so I'm somewhere in between computer programmer and artist at the moment. Somebody jokingly called me a computer punk, which I thought was quite interesting. And it's kind of silly, but describes me quite well, I think. And I hope this will make sense. Does this thing work? Yay, great. So this talk is called No Secrets, and it's about transparency and openness and sharing, both from a technical standpoint, but also in a creative sort of sense. So initially, this talk is going to be about me and my work and kind of what I do, but also I hope that some of this you'll be able to apply some of this to your own work and your own practice, and I hope that kind of in revealing how I work, you can start questioning how you work a little bit. Just before I start, can I get a show of hands? Who is a programmer or has written any code, ever, even a little tiny bit? Oh, wow, okay, so like half. Okay, but who hasn't ever? Who's never written any code? Oh, not many. Okay, cool. So this is not a technical talk. It's nice and creative, lots of colors and stuff. I didn't study computer programming. I'm a programmer for my job, but I snuck in through the back door, I guess. So I am not what I call a classically trained programmer. So often programmers, they've studied for years. They've done computer science or maths, that kind of thing. Nope, didn't do that. I did design and visual arts, and then realized that programming was something that I can learn on my own, really. So often programmers tend to be that guy, but I definitely identify myself as more on this sort of side, and I think this is perfectly fine, okay? I think that often programmers, particularly the really good ones, this guy, are very dismissive of people using code, using things wrong or incorrectly, and I think that's completely ridiculous. Obviously, the problem with the music analogy is that you don't get classically trained musicians going to punk gigs and telling people that they're doing the music wrong. It doesn't, although you get that in computers, which doesn't make sense. I'm constantly shouted at by real programmers because I'm doing things incorrectly, which is just bullshit. So nowadays, I spend most of my days feeding on the tears of computer programmers and just getting on with what I do, which is great. So my first job was at an agency. It looks like this. So I lied about how good a programmer I was. So the lesson there is, if you've got an opportunity to do something, just say yes. You can learn most of this stuff later on, okay? This is programming or creativity or anything easy like that. Most of the time, you can Google it and say yes, okay? It's definitely the case. If you're on a plane and somebody says, is there a doctor on the plane? Don't do that. You can't learn on the job. But most of the time, for something as easy as making stuff with computers, we've got Google now. It's great. You can do it. What was interesting, the reason I mentioned this is that initially, I was working a lot in the pharmaceutical sector, so lots of medical work. And everything was behind closed doors and secret. And the code that I wrote and the stuff that I made went on a hard drive into an archive and never saw the light of day. And lots of it wasn't public. Now, at the time, I wasn't a programmer, really. I became one because I lied. And what was interesting was I didn't question that the stuff that I make is secret and goes away. And it seemed fine. So I then got a job at the BBC working on a lot of children's stuff. So this job was like for millions and millions of users. So normally when I do this talk in the UK, there's a few people in the audience who have small children. They're the tired ones, and they kind of cry at me and they thank me for making these things, because these apps buy parents a little bit of time sometimes, which is nice. So this was a really high pressure, really massive job. I won a couple of BAFTAs, which was good. Didn't let it go to my head at all. Oh, people laughed, thank God. Great. Now, at the same time, so this was very corporate and very sort of very engineering-y, but at the same time, I started getting into stuff that was off the grid and off the path a little bit, using using programming, using code to make stuff that was a bit closer to my heart rather than making stuff for money, okay? Money's fine, but actually you need to scratch the itch a little bit as well. So for example, I started a game jam. So has anybody heard of a game jam? Yeah? You heard of a hackathon, right? So game jams are like video game hackathons, and the idea is that you go, in maybe 2 days, you go from an idea, you build a video game, and then you finish it, and you can play it in the space of like 2 days, or sometimes even 1 day, and sometimes a couple of hours. And there's even a game jam called the 0 Hour Game Jam, and that starts at midnight on the day the clocks change, you know, for daylight savings. So at midnight, you start making your game, the clock goes to 1 o'clock, you finish making your game, and then the clock goes back to 12, and you've made a game in no time, which is really cool. So some of this is about video games. So this was a game that I made with a 12-year-old artist. So he did all the pixel art, and this was about a fat vampire who eats too much food. And it was mainly because we wanted to use the pun vampire the buffet slayer, which is that joke going to go across? No? Oh, man, nightmare. So board games are also good. So the idea is it's much more about the idea. So code is great for getting your ideas out really quickly, but if you want to just have paper and pens, that's great too. I really like it when people make stuff that you couldn't take on a plane. That's if you make something that you couldn't get through an airport, you're probably winning. And then, so this was one I made quite recently. So this was a hand-drawn game that I made in like 8 hours, which is quite fun. So the idea is it's all about rapid experimentation and rapid prototyping. And I've branched out from games into more experimental artwork and that sort of thing, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. So as a result of sort of leaving the path of sort of corporate employment and doing this stuff, I kind of really early on had this realization that programming is magic. It is actually magic. And the reason is that all you need is an idea and persistence, really. All you need is a cheap piece of crap computer. You could do it on a Raspberry Pi for $20 if you want. An idea, and you need persistence, and probably Google also. And you don't need any raw materials. You just need to persist. And once I figured that out, I realized that often programmers are asked, oh, can you build this? And actually, it's kind of, the answer is always yes, if you've got enough time, really, or money. So from children's, I ended up working for research and development in the BBC. And this is kind of where everything changed a little bit for me, because suddenly I was working in research, answering actual questions rather than building products. And that as a dynamic is very, very different. It's much more experimental. There's much more kind of opportunity to fail. And failing is great. I'm going to show you loads of failing. It's going to be brilliant. And what the coolest part about this was that I was no longer tied to a desk. Like, most of my work is not at a desk anymore, which is great. A lot of programmers quite like a desk, and I'm much more interested in working at festivals and this sort of thing. So we were making tools, for example, all built in JavaScript that would let people operate cameras, so virtual cameras. So this is a project called Primer, which instead of having lots of cameramen, you would set up massive HD cameras all pointing at the stage, and a single user could pick out a virtual camera out of the feed. So rather than having a director and 4 cameramen being told to look at the guitarist, you have enough pixels that you can grab a bit of the guitarist and have that as a live transmission. So the idea was that using web technology just bravely, this wasn't particularly new technology, it was just a brave application of existing technology. A single operator could cover a live event rather than a team of 6 people, all from a copy of Google Chrome, which is pretty cool. Instead of testing it on users at a desk, we tested it at festivals on drunken people, which was good. Yeah, drunk people factor into a lot of my testing. They're a really honest audience. So we also started looking at things like object-based broadcasting, which is the idea that you take a linear piece of, say, television, and you chop it up into pieces, quantify it as data instead of just a program. And then you're able to swap out pieces. So we used a cookery program. So the idea is, what if we could make a cookery program that looked like a normal show, but it might know that you're a vegetarian, or it might know that you have 10 kids, or there's just 2 of you. And it would swap out the wording and the language and the ingredients and the numbers, and you would get a cookery program that looks like a TV show, but completely for you. But rather than doing this in software, we built a kitchen. And again, you'll see lots of photographs of me writing code in really stupid places. Instead of doing it at a desk, I'm sat in a room. This was about 7 in the morning in a really cold TV studio. So for some reason, I found myself working in very, very strange places, and that's my happy place. So in many ways, as somebody who is experimental with technology, working at research and development was probably my dream job, really. So I did what anybody would do. I quit the job, and this was to go freelance. So there were a million reasons why I would quit my dream job to become a freelancer. The main one, really, aside from money, is that the problem is, particularly as a programmer, you're often at the end of the chain of creativity. So all of the questions and the answers and the research, everything happens, and then somebody hands you a thing and just says, can you just make this? There's no kind of creativity, there's no kind of problem solving. It's often you become a conduit for somebody else's ideas, and then I'm kind of like a human printer for somebody's ideas as a programmer, and that's not what I want to be. Remember that I didn't study programming. I've come from a creative background, so this never felt right. So now I'm working for myself, which is great. So the graph that describes what I enjoy is the opposite of the kind of graph that most programmers would draw you. Now, programmers don't like chaos intrinsically. They like predictability and calm. We like no surprises for programmers. They don't like surprises. And actually, I've grown to just embrace the chaos a little bit. You should definitely try it, programmers. Particularly, so this whole idea of working quickly and transparently and openly and very bravely lends itself well to short projects. Now, these slides are always in my talks because they're really important, but there's two reasons why short projects are completely my jam, okay? The first is new project smell. Now, does anybody know what I mean by new project smell? Day one of a project? Yeah, you can see a couple of people nodding. You know what I mean. So programmers, this is when you've got a blank project that you've not started on, but all of your ideas are buzzing around your head, and you're ready to go, day one, and you don't hate the project yet, okay? Or if you're a designer, you like new stationery, that kind of thing. Like the first few % of a project are just, oh, brilliant. And conversely, no matter how much you love a project, if you work on it for a year or 2 years, you grow to hate it, right? So can I have a show of hands? Has anybody worked on something for more than a year? 2 years? Did you hate it at the end? Yeah, everyone's nodding, okay? So by working quickly, you keep that enthusiasm. It's not just liking a project, but it's that enthusiasm for getting something done. You keep that and you get it every time. The second one is finishing stuff is, like, it sounds really silly, but actually finishing stuff is the most important thing in the world. There's nothing worse than overreaching on something. When you set out either a side project or something you're being paid money to make, you set out to do it, and because you don't have enough time or resource or whatever else, you fail to do it, is the most crippling, horrible thing. Whereas if you set out to just make something very small and you finish it, it's such a creatively nourishing thing, and it's such a positive thing. Incidentally, this also allows you to fail when you're working on a short project. If you work on something for 2 years and it goes, that's a horrible, horrible, horrifying thing. But if you work on something for a couple of days and it fails, and you do it 3 or 4 more times, but you get closer to your goal, then failing is a completely legitimate form of finishing, okay? So when I talk about finishing, it can mean that something's on fire after a few days, and that's totally cool. Oh, and I suppose the third reason that I prefer short projects is that, and this is kind of hard to talk about, but a few years ago, my wife was diagnosed with children. And she hates that. And what this meant was that suddenly I had to keep my projects short, because I can't now spend 4 days devouring a new technology or reading a huge book, or that kind of, just in practical terms, I have to work quickly now. And so it's something that's really steered me in terms of just, I have to keep this energy up and figure out if it works. Great, next, and keep going, okay? So I work with algorithms a lot, and I'm much more interested in process than the finished thing. So this is a random example. A gallery commissioned me to do some artwork for their branding, and the image on the left is something that we designed manually. But that isn't what we submitted to them. We submitted what an algorithm tried to do itself. It tried to approximate the image by drawing a single triangle and then trying to decide if it was closer to the image or not, and it just does that over hundreds of thousands of iterations. And you can kind of see that sort of thing. And I'm much more interested in process. As a creative using code, I don't really care about the code. I care about the product, and I'm not particularly bothered about submitting either the code or anything I've done manually. I like the fact that I can make a process do something like that, and that's the product. The word algorithm, by the way, is typically, in programmers, you'll totally get this. So the word algorithm is what a programmer will tell you, or a programmer will say if they don't want to tell you what they did. It's just an algorithm. And it's like the ultimate programming cop-out. I use it all the time. You guys know who Piers Morgan is in this country, right? Horrible man. And apparently only millennials use the word algorithm, which is absolutely just ludicrous. So again, the same gallery commissioned us to build a slightly bigger project. So this was the Corner House Scribbler. So this was for a gallery that had been open 30 years, so about as old as me. And it was a real part of Manchester, a real fabric of the city kind of place. And they said, can you build us something that will let everybody who's passed through this place, so millions of people, leave a message to say goodbye because we're closing? And it was a blank sort of project. And we had a million and one ideas, but we decided to build a machine. Have you guys seen the film Big, Tom Hanks? You know, that machine at the start that casts a spell on him? So what we wanted was this machine to sit in the gallery, and when it receives a message, either via the website or on Twitter, it would kind of crank into life, and this big pencil would write your message. And the way it works is it's got an Arduino inside it. So this is totally an Internet of Things project. I occasionally use hardware in these things. And the idea is it was constantly listening for messages, and then it would print it out. A few people said, oh, how did you get the giant pencil to write the message? It's like, of course we didn't. There's a printer inside with the front torn off, and it's fine. So I'm a big fan of taking technology and tearing it apart until it does the job that you want, okay? So yeah, don't be afraid to break your stuff. So the cards, we had about 6,000 messages altogether, and they were hung up over the gallery as the time went on, so it slowly started to take over the gallery space, which is really cool. And some of them were really nice. It's 30 years of history, so we had a lot of messages from people who had met their wives and husbands in the place, which is really nice. You know, really poignant, you know, tear-jerking kind of things. You know, and this kind of. I'm not going to read these out, but they're kind of cool. And then some slightly less nice ones. And I'm absolutely not reading the last one out. I'm sorry. But yeah, so it was just a really, really nice way of using quite quick technology. So we built this whole thing in about 3 horribly busy weekends. It wasn't like months and months and months, and it was a very, very tiny budget. And it was kind of basically exactly the same as Jan's talk. It was just wood and a saw and some Arduinos and just persistence. There was nothing clever. We were just trying to be really, really quick with this thing. Now, the reason I showed you this is that whole project was the most transparent possible project. So our process, our code, so our process, our code, the machine specifications, all of the messages, everything was shared completely openly. So everything is open source, right down to the design of the machine and the spec for the electronics. Every time a message came in, it was automatically posted to Twitter. So everything that passed through the machine, even the stuff that was too rude to print, ended up being shared. And it was really important. And this happened, this carried on even after the project. So I was asked if I wanted to take part in a design project called the Manchester Moleskin, which is like a notebook where creatives in the city get one page. And obviously all the pages were illustrators and graphic designers making beautiful pages. And I got it and said, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And what I ended up doing was open sourcing the project by hand, which is just ridiculous. Has anybody ever tried to write code with a pen? It's just like the most ludicrous thing ever. But what I really liked was that this idea sort of challenges the notion of, well, sometimes sharing your stuff and open sourcing and kind of being transparent is not necessarily about just sticking it on GitHub. Just the idea that I can then put this in a gallery, you could go to the gallery, copy down the code, and then you have the software from my picture is something that I find quite appealing. So I don't keep anything to myself. Everything is transparently shared, which I'll show you in a minute. So what I'm trying to get at is a lot of my deal is interrogating my practice and figuring out what makes me tick as a programmer, and then destroying that completely. And it's something that I highly recommend you trying. Often, the best stuff that I've done is when I'd use something it's not really supposed to be used in that kind of way, and it sort of breaks, but interesting stuff comes out, right? So the scribbler, tearing the front off that printer so it works, was the only way we could get it working, and I really, really enjoy having sort of broken, janky stuff that when you stick it together becomes a cohesive kind of creative whole, okay? So, for example, one of the things I do, I cause a lot of mischief on the internet. I write a lot of Twitter bots that annoy a lot of people, and it's really, really, it's a lot of fun. So, for example, this one makes up fake hipster bars in my city, and I think people try and find them, which is great. So, yeah, so it just chooses nouns and then goes, oh, yeah, there's a place called Hammer and Bowtie. It's in a lorry on this street, and people try and find it, which is great. And it's been annoying people for years. I also make one for fake JavaScript technology, so I get developers retweeting this going, oh yeah, I'm going to totally use this, and it's just nonsense that a robot is making, which is brilliant. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is that everything, all of that Twitterbot stuff is built on a single technology. It's called tracery, and it works like this. So you have an origin, which is like your starting point, and tracery is just, it tries to construct sentences from the rules that you set up. So it says, greeting, my name is Dan, and I'm a thing. And where it says greeting, it picks one of the greetings, and where it says thing, it picks one of the things. So pretty easy. The power of it is that it goes infinitely deep, so patterns can be made of patterns can be made of patterns. So you can make it generate sort of human readable and human sort of understandable speech really, really easily. Now, that's what it's supposed to be used for. I took it and murdered it, and some interesting stuff came out. So this is what it looks like. So it's lists of words, and this is how it generates sentences. The more you give it, the richer the set of data is. So what I did was, I started making that code generate more code, which was a little bit weird. So I've now got some code that's designed to generate poetry and words, now generating code, and it just turned into chaos straight away, but chaos is good, right? Chaos is good. So I ended up making visual art and machines that could make stuff in nightclubs and that sort of thing, completely autonomously, using a tool that was never designed for it. And the person that made the tool was just like, why did you this? And as soon as, if I make a creator scratch their head and go, why did you do this? I know I'm onto a winner, right? So yeah, so it's the kind of thing I can now leave running in nightclubs, and it generates visuals for me all day, and I can go to the bar, which is great. I'll try a video. And if not, I'm not too worried. The internet here sucks. I'm going to do a demo later on, so let's not worry about videos for now. Oh, hang on. So this is a totally generated video. I didn't touch this at all. The robot made these visuals and then put them all together in a video. It's also worth noting that the music was generated in the same sort of way by a musician who writes algorithms that make music as well. So this whole thing was made by robots, which is great. And one of the projects that I've got on at the moment is that I want to make a nightclub kind of gallery installation that's going to be a robots-only nightclub. So we're going to have music generated by algorithm and visuals generated by algorithm and lights and smoke and everything else. But there's going to be a closed door with a face detection thing on. So if a human walks up to it, the door will lock and you can't get in, which is going to be cool. So really, really into this algorithmic thing. I'll show you more in a minute. Okay. So the transparency thing also has unlocked a lot of collaborations. So this was a recent project that I worked on. It was like a theatre project with someone called Sonia Sabri, who is an Indian dancer. She makes these amazing cutting-edge one-woman shows. And we were able to go in there and use Arduinos and a lot of lights and cabling and hope to get this stuff working. And the idea that we were, rather than sitting in an office, I was sat on cross-legged on the floor of a dance studio making wireless lights that she could cradle and walk around with and dance with and that sort of thing. And I think that the only way you can make this kind of collaboration work is by being really, really open and really brave with technology. And this is kind of a theme that goes right through a lot of my work. And people stood up and clapped, so it worked. That's good. So transparency is like, do we even need transparency? Does transparency add anything? Like, would you use, show of hands, would you use this? No? No, I wouldn't. So I guess what I'm talking about is, firstly, technical transparency. So all the code, every bit of code that I write goes up online, goes on the internet, and you can have it and take it. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. But also, creative transparency is something that I think a lot of people are a bit averse to doing. And the reason is that I think when you're that transparent about the way you work, it's warts and all, right? So the stuff that doesn't work, and your mistakes, and your panics, and all of that stuff that's part of being a creative is suddenly exposed. And I think that a lot of creative people like to take a finished project and go, finished, isn't this great? And what you don't see is the other 99% of the project where they're up at night going, oh my God, this is shit, or you know, all of that stuff. And that to me is where the good stuff is, right? I can't ever imagine me just going, finished project. The process is everything. Sorry, I keep hitting my little thing. So it feels wrong. It almost seems at odds. And I've had a few people say, why would you give away your secrets and give away your process? And why would you want to make yourself that sort of vulnerable and visible? And there's a million reasons, but there are three really big ones. And the first is that you get to test this stuff really quickly on people that aren't me, right? And the dance projects, for example, I was able to work with the dancer like on the site and just get it done straight away. And I think that you can't test something. You're a bad judge of your own stuff. So when you make something, the one person on the planet who's a terrible metric, is a terrible measurer of whether or not it's good is you, really. So getting something to other people is like sort of intrinsic to why I get stuff done, really. And the second one, again, I talked about sort of failing really quickly. By being this transparent and by being quick and sort of agile, and I mean agile in the literal sense, not agile like the boring software methodology, you can fail really quickly and get feedback and iterate. And if your idea is finished and you've got 5 ideas that were all on fire but edged you a bit closer to that end goal, it's still totally valid. That's just part of the process for me. Nobody finishes a complete piece of work without a lot of trial and error, and I just expose that. And again, for the third really big win for me is being able to release the source and then watching somebody else take it and work with it is really, really cool. And it's something that I didn't even know was a thing when I started programming. I had no concept of the fact that I could take everything I've made, stick it on the internet, and someone much smarter than me is going to make it even better, right? So yeah, fail boldly. If you're going to screw up like you mean it. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you an example. So I'm going to talk a little bit about live coding, because this illustrates all of this notion of transparency and rapid prototyping and brave approaches to tech and everything else. And it's really noisy, which is good. So specifically, I'm talking about live coding, all one word, not live space coding. Now, live space coding, has anyone been to any programming conferences? Yeah, a few people. And it's always a really boring guy in like a shirt and tie doing something boring with a computer. That's live coding. This is live coding. Live coding is a specific creative practice of using code to create music or visual art or that kind of thing, but completely on the fly. And it's an actual creative practice rather than just boring men making boring things. I'll try and show you this one as well, because it's kind of... So that's not going to make any sense to you at all, but it will, I promise. So what I'm talking about specifically for my purposes is about the visual side rather than the music. And sometimes it looks like this. So sometimes I'll be using live code to make visual art, and you will have no idea that I'm writing code. I'll be sat at the back of a nightclub somewhere while somebody else is on stage, and I'll be going da-da-da-da, and stuff will be happening. Now, that's kind of cool. I've even got a GIF of somebody playing, and I'm sat way over there in the dark writing code to make this stuff happen. Now, sometimes, and this is more interesting, you'll have seen on that video, the code is on the screen, which seems completely nuts, really, on the surface. Why would you put all of your code that you're writing and sometimes making mistakes with and all of that stuff into the visuals, which seems ridiculous? Now, sometimes when I do events where the code is supposed to be on the screen, that's fine, and I'm going to tell you about that in a second. Sometimes when I'm at something where people are not expecting the code, I'll have 100 people all dancing, and there's always one guy right in the center of the dance floor holding a beer, staring at the code like that. I'm like, that's my guy. So regular programming, so the people who put their hands up as programmers, you will totally get this. Now, regular programming, you write some code, and then you press a button, and the computer checks the code and does a load of stuff, and then your thing pops out after a few seconds or minutes or whatever. Okay, so there's a disconnect. Live coding is just immediate. As soon as you start doing anything, it happens. And this is where this kind of really rapid improvisation stuff comes in, and this is why it's exciting. So the way it works is, you have a black screen, typically, or something like that. You start typing. And as soon as you start typing, it goes, hey, you type the word box. I'm going to draw you a box. And then you type the word rotate, and it makes the box rotate. OK? Super easy? Yeah? So talk is pretty cheap. Shall I show you? Shall I make some really loud noise at you? No? Yeah? All right. So this is on someone else's computer, and it's a German keyboard, so I have no idea if this is going to work. But let's give it a whirl. Ooh, this is scary. OK, can everyone read that? Shall I make it a bit bigger? OK. OK, so this is a language called Foxdot. And it's basically a load of Python that sits on top of a software called Super Collider. You don't need to worry about any of that stuff. But if you've listened to any electronic music in the last 10 years, chances are high that you've listened to something that's been made in Super Collider. Now, Super Collider is super complicated, so I just I'll leave it on one side and leave it running. And then the language on top of that is designed to be a really, really simple layer over the top. Because the idea is that you're doing this stuff in like a nightclub, potentially, or in a very, very stressful kind of late-night situation after a few beers. So you need it to be very, very simplistic. So don't worry about all of it. If you just look at the very, very top line there, let's see, does this work? Great. Can I get a little bit of volume, please? Cool. So what we've got is, that X is a drum beat. It's just a bum. And what we've got is an X and a space. So it's going bum, space, bum, space. If I take the space away, yeah, so pretty easy. Or if I add some other characters, oh no. Oh, God. Where did my thing go? I think I killed it. Oh, man. Jan, can I have your password? I killed the thing. Nobody look. OK, so I'll explain how this works. So the characters are each a different instrument. They're just a sound file sat on my machine somewhere. Is it still there? Yay. OK. I'm not going to press whatever I just pressed ever again. OK. Can everyone read that? Cool. So what we've got is the X is a drum beat, and there's loads and loads and loads of sound files on my machine here that just match to different letters. So for example, if I go, oh man, what does that button do? It kills it. It's this German keyboard. I'm struggling here.
Don't press Command Q.
It's that button there. OK.
It's working again.
Yay. OK, cool. OK. Your dashes are in the wrong place. OK, cool. They literally are. Oh, there we go. So we've now got boom, tss, tss, tss. OK? So pretty easy. And the way it works is that everything is on the beat. So as I make changes and I tell this environment to take my changes in, it does it on the beat. So you never have anything that goes all kind of crazy. Everything's rhythmic, which is quite nice. It adds it to the clock. So for example, if I go back to just this, do you see that red flash? That red flash just means I'm just talking about that one line. In the normal programming, you have a lot of code, and it takes it all and does it all at the same time, whereas live coding is much more about adding layers and adding different bits. So for example, this next one down here is a load of symbols. So do you see it waited till the next bar before adding them in? And you can keep adding this stuff really, really easily. So for example, tell you what, we'll put an off-kilter bit of music on here. So quickly, with just, and all that is 3 MP3s on my computer, but it's just being really clever about the way it lines them up. And we can add a really cool snare in. OK, so we've got stuff happening. This really complicated one at the bottom is something that I wrote before. Don't worry about this one. I'm just going to add it in because it makes a cool noise. OK? And then, for example, what I could do is, so this long line here that says the word orient on it, if I start this playing, what it's going to do is it's going to play notes up a scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I add this in, we'll make it a bit louder. OK? And what you can even do is you can make the code modify itself, which is great. So obviously, I'm typing all this stuff. But sometimes you want to set something up that's just going to modify itself, and you can leave running. So for example, what I could do is I could write the word every, and then for, how do I, and every 4 bars, it will reverse the orders. If you listen carefully. OK? And what's cool about this is that once it's working, you can then start to modify it. So it's less about writing lots and lots and lots of code than it is about editing what you've already got. OK? So normally programmers have, you see them on films, programmers have like pages and pages and pages of code. And actually, I don't really want that when I'm live coding. So I can, like, for example, turn a few of these off. So I've just got the drum beat and the bass line. And I could change this, for example, to be a different instrument. So, I don't know. And mess with some numbers. And then bring stuff back in again. So in almost no code, and without thinking almost, I'm jamming with code, which is quite a nerdy, geeky thing to say, but it's quite an interesting way of sort of experimenting with programming. Okay, so I think you're kind of getting it. I'm also going to try, because you can do this with visuals as well. Let's see if this works. Maybe not. Okay, I'm gonna not worry about it too much. Cool. So I think that kind of gives you the idea of how it works. So, what is actually going on here? Like, really. So the main thing that we're doing is we're live compiling. So we're taking some code that's constantly running, we're making a change, and as soon as we make that change, things happen. And what this means is that you can live code. You never really set out to live code with a plan. It's much more experimental than that. And the idea is that, for example, if I'm doing, when I make visuals, I do exactly what you've just seen here, but I'm just making stuff on the screen. And what it means is that you can collaborate with others in a really sort of experimental way. And even if you don't know what they're going to do, you can react very, very quickly. And immediately, you've got this kind of really sort of nice, sort of cohesive collaboration going on, which is quite exciting. Like, I've live coded visuals for open mic night, so I've had 15 people, all of whom play different music. And I've been able to very, very quickly react, which is really exciting. So the programmers will go, hey, what if you type it wrong? You're in a nightclub, you're on a massive projector, or 5 projectors. What if you make a mistake? And live coding is really good in the sense that most of the environments that you use if it detects that you've made a mistake, it just won't do anything, which is good. And again, a lot of the time when you're doing this, you've had a few beers and it's dark, so it's quite good to make sure that it's going to handle your drunken mistakes pretty well. Now, the question I get from a lot of programmers is, why on earth would you do this? Why would you write code in a frickin' nightclub, just in front of hundreds of people, instead of doing it in an office where if you make a mistake, you just swear under your breath and carry on going, okay? And there's a million reasons, and on the surface, it does seem ridiculous, and it is quite stressful to do, as you've just seen. Now, the most important part is that live coding, to me, represents a total process reset, okay? Everything you've been trained to do as a programmer, all of the risk averseness and the carefulness and the documentation and all of that other garbage that comes with writing code for money goes out the window. And it's much more about just being in the moment and using stuff and using your instincts and improvising and ignoring that inner voice saying you're doing it wrong, okay? Because you're not. If it sounds amazing, you're not doing it wrong. And that's advice for every creative act. If it looks or sounds or is amazing to you, it's fine. Don't let any neckbeard tell you you're doing it wrong. The immediacy, of course, is really, really important. Like, programming, there's a lot of cruft with programming. Often, it's very, very hard to even get a hello world working without a load of garbage at the start. And I like the idea that I can go, red box, go, and it just makes a thing. There's something very, very exciting about that. And improvisation. So improvisation is something, there's 2 kinds of improvisation, okay? One, when you set out to improvise and you say, I'm going to live code and I'm going to improvise over some music. When you don't plan to improvise, that's where the danger is, okay? So like something's on fire or whatever, that's a terrible kind of improvisation. So it's something I highly recommend is trying, like making time to improvise, setting yourself these small kind of projects and sort of goals and working in ways where you don't know what the end point is something that I find quite creatively, quite exciting. And the transience of live coding. So all the stuff you saw me do then it will not exist anymore after the fact. Because I'm not writing lots and lots and lots. I'm writing some, and then I'm changing the baseline. I'm adding a drum. I'm adding whatever. So the code isn't saved. It doesn't exist anywhere outside of the moment. And even if it did, if I gave you the code and you took it home, the whole point is that you write this stuff in a club environment or in a gallery or with a performer, and it only makes sense then. So I quite like the idea that you're writing code that only is for a specific time and place. And there's something, again, programmers they cuddle their code and they love their code and they document their code and they put it on GitHub and blah, 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 blah. And actually, the idea, I see a couple of programmers like you guys, like the idea that you would take all of that stuff that you've worked hard to write and then just throw it in the bin at the end is just insane, okay? And yeah. Go insane, it's great. And live coding, really, it just kills posers. There's no way that you can, it's a very honest thing. Because you're working so transparently and everybody can see what you're doing and it's in massive letters, I can't sneak onto Stack Overflow and go, oh my God, how do I do this? Because there's a load of people dancing. So you've kind of, it's quite challenging, but it's very, very transparent, very, very kind of, there's a truth in live coding, I think. And being asked to pose for this photograph, the irony is not lost on me. It's just ridiculous, but yeah, completely true. Now, one of the cool things that's come out of live coding is Algo-rave. Has anyone heard the term Algo-rave? A couple of people. OK, cool. So Algo-rave is like a series of electronica events and gigs and nights and festivals that are all about live-coded music. So the idea is you don't have a DJ, there's no records, there's no decks, there's no plan. It's just chaos and live code, and it's all techno pretty much. And the idea is that visualists and musicians come together with these tools to make electronic music that has not been heard before and in a completely new way, but in a loud kind of club setting. So Algo-rave, the word comes from algo, as in algorithm, and rave, as in rave. Got it? OK. I'll show you a quick sample of me working with someone, if this works. I'm going to skip through. Might be loud. Not loud at all. OK, great. So you can't tell, but there are people dancing out of shot. So this is music and visuals all created with code from scratch, with no plan whatsoever. Let's get through this a little bit. I think you get the idea, right? OK. So Algo-rave describes itself as sounds wholly or predominantly characterized by the emission of a succession of repetitive conditionals. Now, this phrase, apart from the last word, was used by the UK government years ago. And what they needed to do was have a legal definition of what music was in order to shut down the rave scene in the 90s. So they had to specifically define what music was in a legal sense. And it was repetitive beats, and they've changed it. So I like the idea that Algo-rave is like an evolution of electronic music that's being made by completely new means, but there's always a look back to what has come before, which I think is quite important. We've been covered in the press, which is quite cool. So Wired, obviously, because it's programming first, we tend to have a lot of, like the Venn diagram of people who are into programming and are into electronic music. There's a very small overlap on the diagram, and that's my guys. So Wired covered us quite a while ago, and they were quite nice, and it felt quite new. Dazed and Confused were a bit confused. Vice were just mean. Vice were just horrible, but they kind of got it. And recently, Mixmag. So Mixmag is, I think it's just in the UK, is an electronic music publication, and is nothing to do with programming whatsoever. And people have started to realize that actually this is a completely valid and new form of electronic music. And the fact, we're now starting to get people coming to live-coded music events with no knowledge that somebody is writing code to make this kind of music, which I find very exciting. So suddenly, people using code in really brave ways are doing something so interesting that people from other spheres that aren't nerds are coming in to enjoy it, which I think is quite exciting, really. There's even a live coding manifesto. I'm just going to read one out because it's quite important. The first point is obscurantism is dangerous. Show us your screens. So live coding is intrinsically transparent. Like nobody live codes away. The whole point of it is that it's real and it's happening now. It's not a record, and that's the kind of the core point. And more importantly, it's not necessary for a lay audience to understand the code to appreciate it, much as it is not necessary to know how to play guitar in order to appreciate watching a guitar performance. Now this is key. Okay, so it's not about understanding what the code is doing, okay? It's about knowing that somebody is making it, somebody's doing it. It's the authenticity of somebody's improvising, somebody's making this thing, right? I watch somebody playing the guitar. I don't know how it's being done, but I can appreciate that someone is doing it with skill and talent and improvisation, and that's more what it's about. The fact that it's computer code is almost like secondary to that thing. So when I said I don't work at desks anymore, I really don't work at desks anymore. So I work at festivals, and it's a very, very terrifying thing to do, to stand like this and write code in front of 1,000 people. So it's like you guys plus another 3 lots of you guys. It's absolutely terrifying. And the code is just a couple of lines of code, but then from that couple of lines of code, massive sounds come out and people are dancing, which is just ridiculously terrifying, but a lot of fun. And occasionally, we'll play basement shows, so if anybody is... so sometimes I don't use screens, I just use people's faces. So this is a Mexican punk singer, so you can just see my code above his temple there. So yeah, sometimes you can't even see the code in order to live code. You just have to wait until the man's shouting is in the right place. You know. So when I talked about embracing the chaos, I wasn't joking around. I also enjoy taking projects and making sure that they don't die. I evolve projects from other projects. So while live coding is quite transient, when we finished, it goes away and it doesn't exist anymore. I also like to create prints and create things from it. So for example, whenever I do performance, I have a script running that captures what's on the projector every 2 seconds and puts it on a drive. So I've got thousands and thousands and thousands of images. If anybody needs a new desktop wallpaper, I've got about 25,000, so knock yourself out. So I've produced a load of prints, for example. So I like the idea that each of these prints represents exactly 5 minutes of a live performance. And you can't, I don't know if you can tell, so there's a longitude and latitude and a date and a precise time. So each of the prints represents a perfect snapshot in space and time of 5 minutes of live coded improvisation. So again, I have no idea what these are going to look like, and I generate these, again, algorithmically. They just pop out and they're done. There's no manual process whatsoever. So my improvisation works in a nightclub, but then I get these prints popping out as well, and the whole thing is just automatic and very unpredictable. So this is like 6 prints from the same night, so you can tell when the drum and bass guy was playing, because they're a lot more mental, so quite fun. And I got one in the gallery, so that was when I put artist on my CV, which is really good. Now, really importantly, so when I talk about transparency, a lot of software people, you will get this. Licensing is always quite important, and it's quite a boring sounding topic. So software will be released under different licenses, the MIT license, the whatever. So I license all of my stuff, my code, my assets, all of those images, everything that I make, under a slightly more permissive license. And it's called the do what the fuck you want to public license. And it is a legit software license. And the entirety is this. And it's just the bottom line is the license clause. You just do what the fuck you want to. So normally, licenses are very, very long. And I much prefer this because, again, I work transparently, I work openly, and there is no value to me in the thing that I work on just sitting on my hard drive and staying there forever and not being taken. Now, in terms of permissions, this is very, very similar to the public domain. So when something goes public domain, it becomes free to use, and you can have it, and there's no warranties or whatever else. But the do what the fuck you want to public license is much more of a call to arms. It's not enough for me to just say, it's public domain, meh. I want to point at people and say, I made this thing, take it, do something interesting with it. You don't have to credit me, I don't care, but I want things to live on, I want things to evolve, that kind of thing, okay? So I'm not sure it's got any actual legal standing, but I like the kind of the provocation of saying, take this thing, do what you want to, okay? Now, although this was about my work, this is definitely not about me, okay? It's about, well, I suppose all of us as creators, really. I really feel like we should be defaulting to this kind of transparent model, right? So I've spent so long making stuff that was the entire opposite of transparency, and everything was very, very secretive and under non-disclosures, and I could never tell anyone about it, and it was doing things that I couldn't share it at all, and it just seems completely counterproductive. And I think that to be transparent, and I'm not talking about necessarily working in nightclubs, I just mean sharing your process and sharing your assets, programmers, open sourcing that side project, whatever. That is brave because you're also sharing your mistakes and you're sharing the journey and you're sharing the path. But actually, that's where the good stuff is, right? So I think this is happening as well. And again, I'm not going to talk too much about the wider ramifications of this, but I do think it is happening. I like the fact that, for example, Twitter, there's now sort of an increasing kind of fight against Twitter being, although it's a massive platform for communication, ultimately it's being policed by a single entity that has only got its own interests at heart. And I like the idea that something like Mastodon, which is an open source, functionally identical to Twitter pretty much, but it's completely distributed, is now starting to gain popularity. I like this idea that people are saying, okay, maybe transparency is the right way to go forward. Yeah? And even my own government now shares a lot of open data. I enjoy the fact that people are starting to see the value in saying, if we sit on this, it is of value to nobody. And it's just, these shifts are starting to happen. And again, as a programmer, I'm now starting to act at the very sort of cutting edge of this thing. And I'm being asked to work in such a way that I'm transparent. So often this isn't just coming from me. The people that employ me are saying, actually, we're sat in all this data. We've done X, Y, and Z with it, but can we share this? Can this become richer and more important for everybody? So when we talk about smart things and a brighter future, I absolutely think, but to me, I think it's not about the technology, okay? Most of the stuff in fact, I would say all of the stuff that I've showed you, none of it is new technology, okay? At all. And the real innovation for me is people being brave with how they apply the technology. And that's the kicker. You know, so the music that was on that video was made by a guy using a language called Haskell, which is older than me. And suddenly, instead of people using it for maths, people are using it for banging techno. And it's just about being brave with your tools and brave with your approaches, all right? So we're the start of this, absolutely. No secrets. Thank you very much.